Welcome to this webinar, which is designed to give you some ideas for refreshing your geography fieldwork at Key Stage 3. My name is Becky Kitchen, and I am the Head of Professional Development at the Geographical Association. My role is to support you in your work, and so if you have any questions or anything that you'd like support and guidance on, you can contact me at any time. I'm going to share some ideas that you can implement in the classroom tomorrow, and some that might take a little bit more time, but will help you to refresh your fieldwork offer. Many of these ideas come from our secondary geography quality mark schools that have been awarded Centre of Excellence in Fieldwork. If you're interested in going through this accreditation or process, you can find more details on our website. Before we start, I want to flag our national research report, High Quality Geography Fieldwork for All, which was published recently and contains support, advice and guidance on several different aspects of fieldwork. It also contains prompts and activities that you might find useful when working with your department to develop your fieldwork confidence and offer. The first idea is explored more fully in the research report and is a restating of what fieldwork is and also what it isn't. This may seem strange, but the more I work with schools, the more I realise that since COVID, the definition of fieldwork has become a little blurred. Although it seems obvious, the first point is that geography fieldwork takes place outside. I think this needs restating because, particularly since COVID, there's been a rise in the use of virtual fieldwork, using Google Street View, for example. This sort of approach is superb and can be used to take students to places that they would otherwise not be able to visit. But it's not fieldwork. The second point is that fieldwork is not the same as a field trip. When we think about fieldwork, we automatically think about booking some coaches for 180 Year 9s and the small fortune this is going to cost us. However, by focusing on the hyper-local and doing more fieldwork in the school grounds and local area, it makes the logistics more straightforward, which means that it's easier to embed throughout the curriculum. Going further afield is also important. How else can we introduce students to geographical environments and phenomena that are outside of their lived experience? But it should be balanced with more regular opportunities. The third point refers to the nature of fieldwork that we do. Because the 6-stage inquiry process is embedded at GCSE, I think sometimes we've forgotten that other types of fieldwork exist and can offer a different perspective or way into investigating the environment. The diagram on the right explores some of these different approaches, which you might want to use with your students. At the same time, it is important that GCSE students understand how the 6-stage inquiry process works. Obviously, they need to carry out inquiries on 2 occasions as part of their GCSE studies, but it's worth highlighting that outside of this, you don't have to do all the stages in one go. So do signpost the different parts of the inquiry sequence when they are, for example, analysing data or thinking about inquiry questions. I know I'm preaching to the converted with the final point, but fieldwork is a statutory element of the national curriculum, GCSE and A-level specifications. It's not a jolly, and it should be considered in the same way as poetry is in English or lab work is in science. Hopefully, the National Research Report will help you to have these conversations with senior leadership teams. There are barriers and issues associated with fieldwork, but it is up to your school to help and support you to deliver the curriculum effectively. It's really important to embed fieldwork throughout your curriculum so that it is inclusive. And one way to do this is to use the school grounds and homework tasks effectively. This first example is from a quality mark school who, at the beginning of Year 7, get each student to adopt a grid square, usually the one where they live or have a connection to. Each lesson, they set a homework where they carry out some fieldwork in their grid square. Week 1 is to take some photographs and to annotate them. Week 2 is carrying out an environmental quality survey, for example. They spend 6 homeworks building up a picture of what their grid square is like before coming back to school with their finished posters. They then spend some time looking at them, comparing their grid squares with their friends and building up a rich understanding of the local area. There are also fieldwork activities that can take place in lessons. For example, students can make a pollution indicator out of squares of cardboard and leave them around the school to investigate which areas have the most air pollution. Students could collect leaves at 5 different stages of decomposition to explore the nutrient cycle. In small groups, they could explore the accessibility of the school site, each group considering a different disability, for example, those who are partially sighted or those who need to use a wheelchair or crutches. Students could then report their findings to the senior leadership team. Infiltration is a great fieldwork activity as it can be done anywhere on the school site with minimal equipment. It also links well to topics such as flooding and ecosystem and soil health. The GA are currently involved in a Royal Society project working with 7 primary and secondary schools to pilot some techniques and resources. Each of these ideas or activities could easily build into larger fieldwork inquiries. However, there are also standalone fieldwork activities which encourage students to think about their location in more depth. For example, a sit spot where students reflect on how landscapes change over time and the natural and human elements of them. This bingo resource is from the Island Geographer website, and it's fantastic as it encourages students to apply their geographical vocabulary to a real environment. Chloe has created lots of similar free resources, and I thoroughly recommend visiting her website. So my second top tip is to think about soft outcomes as well as geographical ones. The left-hand diagram shows the 3 different outcomes which should be planned into your fieldwork. Start with the fieldwork task. What's the main thing that you want to get out of the fieldwork? And then consider what the wider geographical learning is. What other aspects could you build in? For example, characteristics of an urban area if you're visiting a town or city, or coastal processes and landforms if you're going to the coast. However, the final aspect to plan are the soft outcomes. There are 10 outcomes of high quality geographical learning that you could consider, such as confidence and character or health and well-being. There are several ways to do this explicitly. For example, when students are working in groups during fieldwork, you can give each of them a role card. For example, one student could be the team captain, one student could be the quality controller to check that all the measurements are taken accurately and recorded, and one student could be the risk assessor. You can see the risk assessor role card here. It's also a good idea to not only plan soft outcomes, but to also assess them. The radial diagram on the right shows a way to do this, and it gives teachers a way to communicate each student's spiky profile. For example, they might be weak at literacy and numeracy, but might be fantastic at problem solving and teamwork. This values these aspects of working like a geographer as much as the more traditional ways of assessing. My third tip is to think about progression when you're doing your fieldwork planning. What does it mean to get better at fieldwork? For Reading School, it's about greater independence and greater complexity, so that by year 13, students are well equipped to carry out their NEA, their independent investigation. The department plotted each of the opportunities that students have to engage in fieldwork from year 7 to year 13, starting with more structured tasks led by the teacher in year 7. Several fieldwork opportunities are built into the curriculum for each year group, but these are often homework activities which remove some of the organisational barriers for both teachers and students. Key aspects of this model to note are that progression is generally, but not always, linear. There are opportunities to shift back to more structured and less complex tasks to consolidate students' knowledge and skills in a different geographical context. For example, the Year 9 fieldwork at Lulworth Cove and Durdle Door is more structured and less complex than some of the Year 7 and 8 activities. The choice of location is not tied to progression. Students explore the school grounds, the local area and other parts of the UK and overseas. Also, the 6-stage inquiry model is used, but rarely in its entirety. It's a really useful activity to do something similar with the fieldwork activities that you give your students. Do they support progression, or are all the opportunities all in the bottom left-hand corner, or in the top right? Progression in fieldwork is something that the GA decided to tackle with our strategic partners, the Field Studies Council. The GA Fieldwork Survey told us that teachers want new ideas for carrying out fieldwork within their school grounds and local area. They want to embed these ideas within their current curricula, and they want resources that non-specialists can pick up and deliver, and they want resources as well that will build progression and don't just repeat the same technique but in a different context. For example, doing the same environmental quality survey in Year 7, Year 10 and Year 13, just in a different place. Therefore, we created a series of spiralised resources. They're divided into 2 strands, techniques and themes, and each set traces a spiral progression pathway so that each time a pupil engages with this knowledge, they build on what they've done before. However, they also work as standalone resources, providing an idea of what high-quality fieldwork might look like for each key stage. The resources are designed to provide a starting point for fieldwork that can be done in the school grounds and local area, and they can be embedded in schemes of work, but can also provide suggestions for activities during transition days or simply to do when the sun is shining and you want to get outside. You can find those spiralised resources on our website. Part of rethinking fieldwork, and not assuming it involves getting on a bus, means that much more can be made of fieldwork that takes place in lessons or for homework. And while I was categorical earlier that fieldwork takes place outside, that doesn't mean that aspects of fieldwork preparation can't take place in the classroom. This slide shows some of the examples of where class activities have been used very effectively to consolidate fieldwork knowledge and understanding. Part of the reason that students find fieldwork difficult is that it comes with its own vocabulary, which otherwise students don't really use. Therefore, embedding this geographical language is helpful, and short multiple choice do now activities, such as the example on the left, drip fed into lessons can really support this. The activity below is another example of where activities can get students thinking about fieldwork. This came from a rivers lesson where students had studied the course of the river from source to mouth. In the last 5 minutes of the lesson, this activity helps students to think about rivers fieldwork without actually going through the process of carrying it out. The photograph on the right shows students doing some work on plastic pollution. In this case, the teacher went out and collected some data, taking samples of plastic pollution at various sites along a beach. They bagged these samples up, labelled them, and then brought them back to the classroom, where students had to classify the samples and analyse the data. It's worth highlighting that just doing these activities is not sufficient. Classroom-based activities should not be an alternative for actual physical fieldwork, but hopefully you can see that they make students' fieldwork diet richer. My final tip is focused on making fieldwork inclusive. To a certain extent, if fieldwork is embedded within the curriculum rather than being a bolt-on, it automatically becomes more inclusive, an entitlement for all rather than enrichment for some. However, it is also important to recognise that some fieldwork, particularly that which is undertaken in a remote or difficult to access location or an unfamiliar environment for students, may require a particular distinct approach. Using the overarching principle of nothing about us without us involves students in discussing and agreeing how they are best supported in carrying out fieldwork. There's been some excellent work done in higher education around developing a set of principles to make fieldwork inclusive and accessible, and these have been adapted and applied to geography fieldwork carried out in schools. These are not intended to be a definitive checklist, but instead provide points, ideas, and support. You can download a full list of these principles from the National Research Report. In addition to these broad principles, several authors have written about their own practical experiences in teaching geography articles. For example, Bob Lang outlines practical suggestions for supporting autistic students, while Janine Madison and Sam Thurston look at mental health and well-being on residential fieldwork. So those are my 5 ideas for refreshing fieldwork at Key Stage 3. 1. Rethink our idea of fieldwork. It doesn't have to mean going on a bus. 2. Think about the soft outcomes, as these are as important as the geography. 3. Try to build in progression and have a look at the spiralised resources on the GA website. 4. Use classwork and homework effectively to make sure that fieldwork is embedded in the curriculum. And 5. Make fieldwork inclusive by considering the principles in the research report. You can find the research report, spiralised resources, and many other fieldwork ideas, resources, and guidance on the GA website.